Hi everyone, it's Jerry. Let's have a look at a game that was played at the 1938 AVRO tournament. This was the strongest chess tournament ever held at the time. On the white end, we had an electrical engineer and already a very well-established chess player, Mikhail Botvinnik. He was one of the few to have earned distinction in another field while also playing at an elite level, a world-class level. He would, a decade later, become the 6th world chess champion. His opponent, the current world chess champion, 4th world chess champion, Alexander Alekhine. The game we're about to observe is very quick to enter a technical phase right in the middle game and on into the end game. This game is a lot about finding ways to improve your position, while at the same time finding ways to negate what it is your opponent would like to do. So let's dive into this one and see how it plays out. We have a d-pawn battle. To be a bit more exact, we're working with a Semi-Tarrasch, tension between C and D pawns. It's resolved somewhat on this move 5. You have the option as black on how to recapture with a piece or a pawn. It's just a matter of taste. Taking with the pawn, you could end up with an isolated pawn position. Okay. Knight takes d5 in this game. Similarly, white has an option with the e-pawn in this case. A bit more reserved, solid, securing the d4 point and paving the way for bishop deployment. Continuing, knight c6, bishop to c4, not just to any square. Oftentimes I'll talk about having an opponent's piece in your camp and challenging that piece. Well, currently black doesn't have any piece on white's side of the board. But the one that's closest to white's side is the knight on d5. White puts pressure on this point, and also note that should there be a capture in this square, white is changing the structure, so that could tip in white's favor at some stage, a potential structural change. Continuing, we have a capture. Black wants to deploy the bishop, but if bishop to e7, white could then take, and the bishop has to take another step to capture, so the tension is resolved on this move 7 in the center. White recapturing with a pawn, so IQP position. Continuing, bishop e7. White can castle. White can also capture on d5, but doesn't. White castles. I'm not saying that this would be a good decision, I just want to note this is the first time where you could, if you wanted to, make a capture on d5, but why is white maybe not doing this? Black castles. Yet again, there could be a capture on d5, but no. Rook to e1, half open file. Guaranteed productive move. And now after b6, only now do we have a capture. Why? Why only at this time is there a capture on d5? Well, timing, right? What is white waiting for? White's waiting for black to exhaust one tempo, one move, to deploy the bishop to b7, because what else is it going to do? If you're considering bishop to d7, that's one of those half-developing moves. Black wants to try and develop that bishop fully, along a main diagonal. Only after b6 does white say, you know what, I'm okay with opening up this door. I just wanted you to wait. I just wanted you to exhaust a tempo with b6. Sneaky. Little detail, but important detail. Continuing, white strikes where black is now weak. Knight is vulnerable as a result of b6. How to defend? Bishop d7. There's b7, there's d7, but black should be welcome to a light square bishop exchange. At this moment, we can judge good and bad bishops by the central structure. The light square bishop, for black, is the bad guy. Black would be welcome to this. Going to b7 does nothing more than defend the knight. Once the knight moves, it'd be staring at its own pawn. It would be a different scenario if this knight was here. Then we could say the bishop on b7 is a productive piece, in an indirect way, because it supports a strongly placed knight on e4. Okay, in this game, it's bishop d7. White continues to develop with a punch in this case. And now we have the underdeveloping. Seems awkward. It is one of the suggestions, though, by the engines. Underdeveloping, offering a light square bishop exchange. You could also play rook to c8 here. What would maybe keep a player away from playing rook to c8 is, at some stage a7 could be a bit sensitive. It's lacking the defense. At some stage, you can maybe take out the knight and then take on a7 to watch out. Maybe your queen gets trapped, but yeah. In this game, it's knight to b8. Bishop f4, keeping this tension. Let black capture you and invite you forward. That's what we have now. Queen takes b5. a6, first pop quiz. Where to go with the queen? Feel free to pause the video. Okay, in the game, it is queen to a4. I like this move. Primary function behind it is not to put pressure on a6. That's secondary. This is the main focal point. c6, preventing what it is black would like to do. Deploy the knight. So from here we have bishop to d6. If black played b5, guess where the queen would go? Open file, where she observes c6. Okay, in the game, bishop d6. There go the dark bishops. And from here, rook a to c1. 18 moves in. It's clear. White is the one who stands better. It's just a question of how much. White controls the only two open files, has a knight that is far better, and okay, the king positions, they just offset. Neither side has a weak king. Neither side has a flight square. Okay, how to continue? We have rook a7, looking for rook to c7 or rook to e7, exchanging off what is, just a dummy piece, a passive rook for an active rook. From here, we have queen to c2. This is one of those positions where you have to ask yourself, what matters most? Would this have been a moment if you were playing to invest a flight square, for example? There's still ways to improve the pieces. Queen to c2 is important. White wants to ensure that the c-pile is under his control for the duration of the game. And because of a move like this earlier move 19, we're going to see a lasting advantage in the form of an active versus a passive rook. Okay, rook e7 in the game. One exchange on board. One rook remaining. Queen c7. You can't support the queen because of the back rank issue. Queen takes, rook c8, mate, soon enough. Queens are now gone. White is still the better side. Material is balanced, but this is a positional situation. Both white pieces stand better. Where does the knight even go? It doesn't even have a move. Okay. Normally I give pop quizzes for the side that's in the driver's seat, but I'm going to throw one, from black's perspective. What do you do in such a situation here? This next move for black is very important. What move would you play as black? Feel free to pause the video. Okay, the best move here, a very important move, f6. It's a small move, just, moving upon one step, but it's very important to make that move. It's very important to challenge this strongly placed rook on the 7th rank. This provides a square for the rook, and there's an additional benefit. This is the primary function, to have f7 available for the rook. Secondary, negate the knight. It's nice to assign two good reasons behind a move. f6 has those reasons connected with it. Black is prepared to go to f7, and if the rook goes to c8, the rook is going to drop back, of course. The knight would be hanging. So the rook is ready to challenge, the black rook is ready to challenge the white rook on the 7th and 8th ranks. And at this point, black would be, black would love to get away with this one with the draw. White is definitely the better side. yeah, let's go for repetition. Okay, this is the main point behind f6. King to f1, it's the endgame. Get the king rolling. From here, rook f7. And now what would you do as white here? Let me throw, I know, what is this, the third pop quiz? Is there a limit that how many pop quizzes I could throw your way? Okay, I'm going to throw another one your way. What would you do here as white? Feel free to pause the video. Okay, here we go. Rook c8. You know, when I first reviewed this game, it was several years ago. And I think I took things away from this game that I really didn't realize at the time. And this may have been one of them. These little technical points in the game, you know, one thing that I could say is that I know it would be a poor decision to exchange rooks. Why would you exchange an active for a passive rook, a rook that's on an open file for one that's on a closed file? Okay, but to go to c8 first, force the rook back, and only then avoid the rook exchange, this difference matters. It matters whether or not the rook is on f8 or f7 when white retreats the rook. And it's not just to any square the rook is retreating to. It's going to c3 where it has some lateral options to maybe pinpoint the queenside pawns. Now, the difference here is that if white drops back to c3 before inserting a check on that c8 square, black could play rook to b7, and this rook does a wonderful job of paving the way for the king to now enter the endgame. This would now start to become a bit of an equalish position. The black king is actually pretty fast to arrive at the e6 or d6 square. I think d6 would be one of the better squares for the king to go to. On a closed file, not going to get hit with checks, by the rook at least. And yeah, it just covers a lot of squares, a lot of entry points by the white rook, whether it's on the c file or the e file. d6 would be a really nice square to get to. Having said this, you know, looking at this move rook c8, forcing the rook to f8 and only then dropping back, how is this different? Well, if the king tries to get active now, the rook gets right back there, 7th rank with check. The king basically has to go back here to defend the pawn. Stepping forward, you're going to get hit with a check. Too scary to go in that direction. I think it's just flat out losing. And this rook is just off the charts strong now. Okay? The knight could drop into h4. You have to stop the knight from getting here. That could be pretty annoying. And if you do move like this, you're really extending the scope of the rook. And this knight could be really quick to track down the pawn. It's imperative that white insert this check at this moment right here on c8 before retreating to c3. Okay. I know I just went off on a bit of a tangent, but I believe it is an important one. Okay, from here we have g5. What would you do as white here? Okay, knight e1. The knight is not doing anything from f3. It's an out-of-play piece. It's killed by the f6 pawn. It's time to reposition. Find a new home. That new home is d3. Okay. h5 follows. And now a very nice move coming up. Feel free to try and figure it out on your own. Here we go. h4. This is a pawn sacrifice. This is a fight for a particular square. White wants one really good square for the knight. If there's one square you could get that knight to, where would it be? f4. White is fighting for the f4 square. White wants this pawn to flinch on g5. Move forward. Capture me if you want. I don't care. I don't care about a material loss. My g-pawn is good. My g-pawn will control these two. All the other pawns are balanced. Same files. They negate one another. And this knight would sweep right into f4. And when he gets there, what is the knight not doing? Okay. Black understands this and says, I'm not budging. There's no way I'm giving you that f4 square. knight d7. So it's off the back rank, but it's still one dummy of a piece. This pawn is laughing at it, and these other two pawns are just getting in its way. Rook c7, rook f7, knight f3. I really like this move. This isn't one of those, if you haven't already figured out, this isn't one of those flash games. Wow, what a tactic. No, this is slow, methodical play, probing for weaknesses, forcing weaknesses in your opponent's camp. But White, it's clear, really wants that g-pawn to move or capture and is willing to waste some time in order to do so. g4 now hits. It's becoming unbearable. Black cannot maintain the g5 point. So, for example, if rook to g7 to defend, White could consider a capture on this square, and now this rook is actually overloaded. White could take on g5, and if rook takes knight, White has just won a pawn, and has still a super active rook. How sad it is for the king. He wants to contribute, but cannot. Okay, cannot be maintained. Black pushes. The knight returns to e1. We know where it wants to go, and White knows where the knight wants to go, and so too does Black. f5. Knight d3 and f4. Just in the nick of time. Can't get to f4. That stopped. Now, this pawn is getting a little bit too invasive. White does not want to see this pawn step up. That would be a great inconvenience to the White king. So, f3. It's as far as you're going to go. And an additional thing I like about this move is that it fixes this pawn on f4. These two pawns I have, well, there's multiple fixed pawns, but look at this dream square on f4. If he ever gets there, he's just targeting additional pawns. He's ready to go into Pac-Man mode, one pawn dropping right off the other, pieces falling. So because of this tension now on f4, we have a 3-point piece restricting a 5-point piece. This is creating an imbalance elsewhere in the position. Kind of have, in a way, I kind of see this position as a rook versus knight, white rook versus black knight position because of this pressure here. It's not fun to have this job. Okay, capture on f3, recapture. A5 is met with a4. Black is finally getting active with the king some. White a little bit as well. And it's kind of tricky to do something for black. The knight, I was pointing out f4, but also what about b6? There's a responsibility by both black pieces. Okay, rook f5 in the game, b3. It's tough to say why b3 here. Okay, it's defending a4, but it's also now going to an unprotected square. Maybe there's some train of thought that says, well, should this rook get active at some stage and the b pawn is captured, it's not going to hit with check. Okay. Continuing, we have king to d8, king e2, knight to b8, and I believe this moment here, this is going to be the last pop quiz. Feel free to pause the video. What does white do next? Okay. Simple enough, right? You could take a pawn, but we don't have that. That is not the best move. In the game, it is rook to g6. It's very important that you not take this pawn. For what feels like the whole game, this queen knight, or black's knight here, has been a struggling piece. But black is pretty close to having that knight not only activate and get to c6, but if it gets to c6, it will be getting to d4, and when it's on d4, it's going to hit hard. It's going to hit with check. It's important white not allow the knight to get to c6 so easily. If you capture the pawn in this position, black would play king c7 with an attack, and when the rook moves, knight c6 is there, And you're not stopping knight takes d4 with check. How easily things can turn if you don't do a little bit of calculation and anticipate the activity of this dummy piece. It, can soon not be so dumb. Okay, rook g6, how is this different? Well, you're not allowing king c7 with an attack and knight c6 to follow. Rook g6, king c7, what do you do about knight c6 now? Nope, can't have that. The knight is there just in the nick of time to stop the knight's activity. Prophylactic move. Okay, knight a6, a sad move to make. It's difficult road ahead for Team Black, and from here, I think we basically just see a lot of the pawns now dropping one by one. Material has been balanced right on up into this move 41, but here we go. They're going to start to all fall. Knight c6, threatening a fork, and that knight's going to be hitting a lot of stuff, right? The rook moves now. Knight hits with check. The first pawn is picked up, and everything is getting hit at this point. Rook d6. White simply defends, keeps pressure here, and by maintaining the knight is once more doing a good job of controlling the black knight. Knight b4 in the game. Knights are now exchanged. Rook and pawn endgame. White is not only up the pawn, but has a better king position and just a better rook. Everything is still better. White now up 2 pawns. Black wants to get into this square. Put pressure, cut off the king, put pressure on the white pawns, cut off the king. If you take on this square, there's many approaches here. Rook to f5 is one. Look at this. It's kind of a weird position for the black rook. There's no good move to the side or forward, and when it goes backward to one of these three, we just have the rook. And he's just going to vacuum up the 2 4th-ranked pawns, and it's just too much of a material plus for white. So in the game, we have rook c6 looking at the c3 square, and really the last thing to note, getting the rook here, we'll have everything defended. Rook takes b4 will defend this base point, and there's no fear of the black rook ever getting this pawn and creating a passed pawn. The king is nearby to defend f3. So just a few more moves in this one. What is this now? 3-pawn advantage. Just play it out a little bit more. Black gets one of the pawns back. The threat here is to save the pawn with h5. Rook takes, king to d3, and at this point, black resigns. He's had enough. Everything is still tipping in white's favor, material-wise, piece-wise, just completely ground down. King here, and, the rook is always tied down to defending. If it did play out a little bit more, I don't know, rook h4, king here, rook e1, check, just scooping up another pawn. This is 3 pawns too many. Okay, well, this is as far as I went in this one after king to d3 once more. Team Black resigns. So that's all I have for you in this one. I feel that this is one of the more instructive games, really going from that middle game into the end game. Nice little tests, I believe. If you happen to be an instructor viewing this video, to maybe challenge your students with. Plenty of technical points to really be taking away from this game. Anyhow, as usual, feel free to leave any feedback to this video in the comment section below. Hope you're having a great day, and I hope you maybe took a thing or two away from this one. That's all for now. Take care.